military dictatorships across history have never ended well. So I think and hope this is the ice cracking around Putin's citadel. And the other thing I wrote, pictures of Putin on the front line earlier this week. I mean, nobody with an intelligence background think that Putin's been much further than the Kremlin. This is all desperation.
Sky News is reporting that all NATO allies have agreed Ukraine will become a member. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has also said once the war in Ukraine ends, Kyiv must have the deterrent to prevent new attacks. Hamish de Bretton is a former commanding officer of the UK's Chemical, Biological, Radiological and Nuclear Regiment. Hamish, good morning.
Good morning.
This feels like a very assertive, clear, definite assurance of support for Ukraine from NATO. Can you just assess for us the reception, the response that we can anticipate from Ukraine and indeed from Russia?
Well, I think, first of all, this is a really good thing. Had Ukraine been a member of NATO in February 2022, Russia wouldn't have invaded. And with Finland now joining NATO 2 weeks ago, the most powerful army in Europe, that is absolutely hugely significant. And Putin now has another 832 miles of border that he must protect. Now, it is clear that the Russian military are taking an absolute hammering at the moment, and we are probably at a tipping point. It is clear that even when Russia is hopefully kicked out of Ukraine, it will still pose a threat. And NATO has become so ingrained in supporting Ukraine to get the invaders out that it's just common sense that NATO brings Ukraine into its fold. And it is a very good day, because I think, we are going to see over the next few months continually bitter fighting. Now, people will be concerned that this will up the ante. And from the very beginning, Putin has threatened nuclear war against Europe and NATO, predominantly to stop NATO expansion. But it has had absolutely the opposite effect, with Finland joining and now looking very likely that Ukraine would. So I know people with the emergency alert about to go off on Sunday are really worried about these sort of issues. But I think actually it's a spent force. And I think Russia's threats of nuclear attack on the West are bluff and bluster. And we should crack on. And the most important thing is to allow Ukraine to prevail, to kick the Russians out, which I think they'll do, then secure Europe with a wider NATO so that we can have a long-term peace. And everybody can get back to normal cost of living, etc.
Yeah, of course. I was really taken by some of your other thoughts this week, Hamish, on the situation, particularly in Russia, which you have described as turning into a military dictatorship. What is happening? What is your analysis?
Well, a lot of people would say that Russia is a military dictatorship anyway. But recently, Putin has announced that he's going to put military veterans as politicians into his United Russia party, which there are other parties, but Putin seems to get 97% of the vote and seems to run the country. Now, with the massive casualty rates that we are seeing from the Russians, both the British and American governments have estimated over 220,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or injured during the war, and the figure might well be higher. Now that Russia has run out of all its high-tech weaponry, the only thing it seems to be able to do is to throw manpower into places like Bakhmut and hope that the Ukraine will run out of ammunition. Now, you can't send hundreds of thousands of young men predominantly to their deaths in a democratic society. So that is what is happening. However, a lot of people think these veterans who have seen what's been happening in Ukraine, quite a lot of them are probably going to say, well, hang on, no, I'm not going to support this. And military dictatorships across history have never ended well. So I think and hope this is the ice cracking around Putin's citadel. And the other thing I wrote, pictures of Putin on the front line earlier this week. I mean, nobody with an intelligence background think that Putin's been much further than the Kremlin. This is all desperation. And I think we need to hold our nerve here. I know people are concerned, but we need to back Ukraine to the hilt so that we can get peace. Russia will always be a threat, but with an extended NATO, I think we are likely to have an extended peace once we get peace in Ukraine.
Wow, that's a very optimistic and positive outlook, actually, to consider. Does that future and that lasting peace include President Putin remaining as president?
Well, that is the $100 million question, and you wouldn't have thought he can. He has failed. He is this great. He's fighting this great patriotic war, as he calls it, as his forebears did against the Nazis in the Second World War. But he's absolutely failed. He's modelled himself on Peter the Great, extending Russia's domain over Europe. That has failed. He has failed so badly. But my piece about militarization, he has absolutely got an iron grip on this. He has a few close lieutenants like Stalin did. He has purges. Anybody who dissents, like Kara-Murza this week, is in jail or poisoned like Navalny and Sergei Skripal. So you cannot imagine, and history relates, that these sort of dictators come to a sticky end. Now, hopefully it's sooner rather than later, but sadly there are quite a few people like Putin around the Kremlin. But with his military pretty much destroyed, I am relatively confident that with an extended NATO and peace in Ukraine, we can yet again enforce peace across Europe. But Russia will always be a threat with its current, dismissal of democracy. We thought after the end of the Cold War there might be hope, but that is gone. So I think Putin's time is numbered.
Hamish, really interesting to get your thoughts on what is a developing story even this morning. Thank you very much. Thanks for speaking to us.
Pleasure.
That's Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, former commanding officer of the UK's Chemical, Biological, Radiological and Nuclear Regiment.